It's gonna occur right here, right after we.
Yep, yep. So when we go to there and run 9, that is this script here. And then I have the affidavit of public right here, but we'll also share it on the screen. So it'll be mine. And then this will be the resolution that you and I will have to sign that we will save for our auditors.
We have a quorum.
We do, yep.
Great. We are right on time too. Good afternoon at 12:15 PM, Thursday, May 14th. Call the meeting of the Lane Regional Air Protection Agency monthly Board of Directors meeting to order. We have the ability to have staff doable. Yeah, thank you, Matt.
Okay, Chair Keating,
Present.
Chair Lovell is excused absence today. Board Member Cutchin,
Here.
Board Member Hensley, Board Member Johnston. Here. Board Member Plummer.
Here.
Board Member Saxon.
Here.
Board Member Settlemeyer.
Here.
And Board Member Stout is also excused. We do have quorum.
Great. Well, seeing that we have a forum, those who are present in person and online, thank you for joining us. Are there any adjustments to the agenda? I don't see any adjustments to the agenda, so we'll accept the agenda as it is, roll through that this afternoon, and it's quite packed. Public participation, members of the public who are present or online are limited to 3 minutes per speaker. Are there any comments on any item on today's agenda? I think Ron's comment, before we unmute Ron, because I invited Ron to speak when I met him at a neighborhood association recently. I think Ron's comment is on an item that's not on the agenda. So correct me if I'm wrong, Ron. I have to just close the first part first before I open the second. Ron, can you hear me? Is that accurate?
I think he's still muted, it looks like.
I should be able to unmute you.
Ron, if you can hear us, can you unmute?
Yeah, sorry, what was the question?
The question is your public comment related to an agenda item, or is it a non-agenda item this afternoon?
I'm sorry, this is Brian Cutchin. It was probably Ron you were trying to address, sorry.
Yeah, Ron, my apologies. I'm not hearing the delay, but it's why don't I open up both since they're both the same agenda item? Ron, do you have a comment that's either related to the agenda or a comment on a topic not included on today's agenda item? You have 3 minutes.
Can you just like automatically unmute him?
Try that. No, I can't do that for him.
Does anyone have Ron's number?
I do not.
I might. Ron, if you're trying to talk, you're muted.
Got his hand raised, so
He can hear us.
This might be a sufficient backup. Hey, Ron, we can't hear you coming through the Zoom. Well, the team can hear you right now. Without objection, we'll happily take your testimony telephonically. Great, go ahead. Ron, thank you for, Ron, thank you for providing public comment. Are there any other members of the public who would wish to address the LRAPA board at this juncture? Not seeing any, we'll move on to item 4, comments from board members. No, this is an opportunity for board, I saw Dylan and then Howard. This is an opportunity for board members to bring up unscheduled items regarding today's public comments and or any written electronic comments that have been received. The board may not act at this time on any of those items that weren't on the agenda, but if it deems it necessary, we can place such items on a future agenda item. Director Plummer.
Yeah, thank you, Chair Keating. I have 2 things I want to say. First, I just want to respond to that fantastic testimony. I'm in total agreement. I think this is a longstanding issue that's been plaguing not just City of Eugene and Lane County, but across our country's airsheds. I think it's really valuable to start looking to see what LRAPA can do. And I know I supported in another role some of the work happening in Portland and Multnomah County to establish restrictions on gas-powered leaf blowers and other lawn equipment. And so there's a clear model. I'd be interested in exploring kind of LRAPA's authority versus like municipal authority or county authority on this issue. And would be, interested in having further discussion as an agency about this at a future time. The other comment I wanted to make is just in light of recent staff departures, I think it might make sense to have an executive session in our next meeting. So I'd just be interested in scheduling some time in our next June meeting to have some executive session time to discuss personnel issues and if there's any changes that need to be made.
Thank you. Are you making that in form of a motion or?
My understanding is that I don't necessarily need to make an motion if there's like general consensus, but I'm happy to make it as a motion.
Without objection? I don't see any objection, and but thank you for making the suggestion about a future agenda item in regard to the executive session at our next regularly scheduled meeting, and appreciate your comments in regard to the public comment that we received this afternoon. Director Saxon.
Yes, I want to commend Ron for his public comment on 2-cycle lawn equipment. It is the amount of pollution that they put out is tremendous. And I know when I walk in the morning with my wife, all the lawn service people are out with their leaf blowers as well as, weed whackers and all that. And it's obvious where it's coming from. A couple of years ago, the Citizen Advisory Committee looked at providing some public education to homeowners, especially on alternatives to using two-cycle engines. And maybe it's time to resurrect that. My other comment, though, is that I do not think LRAPA has a regulatory authority to address those two-cycle engines. I think they're mobile sources. And the cities in Oregon and elsewhere that have banned two-cycle engines for lawn care equipment, especially, have done so outside the purview of the Clean Air Act. It's been more based on nuisance, noise, and those kind of things. And so I think the path to do something like that rests with the cities like Eugene or Springfield, if they so elect. And I know that it's fraught with a lot of political impact, because people don't want to necessarily give up the equipment they have and invest in battery powered stuff, which is probably better anyway, because he likes to have a jug of gas in the garage, but I don't. But anyway, I think it really is going to be incumbent upon municipalities to do that. And maybe staff, can weigh in on LRAPA's regulatory authority, but I don't think you guys can do that.
Yeah, I'd love to hear staff's reaction, if possible, before we place this on a future agenda.
Yeah, well, I appreciate the opportunity to speak. For one, I agree that the two-cycle emissions that are created are greater than what you may see in other forms of combustion, where the technology is of such that the emissions that are generated from it are quite a bit less. I have questions to what under the Clean Air Act, what we implement here in Lane County for stationary sources, which is broadly airshed management from what are the industry and what are the emissions from those sources, and how can we regulate that from a public health perspective. I would want to understand more fully what potential authority we have. I also would want to understand too the multiple perspectives across Lane County in terms of what could be hypothetically a county perspective and a county authority that might not be appreciated or resonate well with the diverse perspectives across the county.
Yeah, thank you. And thank you, Director Saxon, for your follow-up comment, Director Plummer for your follow-up comment to the public testimony and staff. Thank you for the Director Knudsen, thank you for the commentary. If I could insert myself into share my perspective as well. I recognize and realize that same tension when the CAC took this issue up years ago. I appreciated their diving in to the matter and it from an exploratory perspective, but also it anecdotally, I saw that it might not be a fit for every community in our county, but there might be a role that the agency can play to help communities get to that yes point that's being realized in Portland and Seattle, DC, and others, and what that looks like. And where does that start? Is that private use or is it the public use? And is it the municipality? Is there an incentive for the municipalities to convert their lawn equipment, their leaf blowers, their mowers, et cetera? What's the incentive for those municipalities to transition to electric? As an example, as a cost saving measure and for clearly in health related reasons as were enumerated and articulated this afternoon. I think it's an opportunity to explore what our authority is or what we can do from an education standpoint and what our municipal partners can realize from an incentive standpoint, either at the state or the federal level, with our guiding hand. So I would like to encourage this as a future agenda item, and without objection. And if so, then we can have a vote. But we're not taking a vote on a substantive issue. This is an agenda item for a further discussion, not to derail the agenda this afternoon. Director Plum.
Yeah, one more thing. I totally support having an agenda item in the future. But I think maybe one role that LRAPA could play on the education side would be maybe some kind of analysis as to what the air impacts are in Lane County from the use of this kind of equipment. I don't know if that's something that would be, readily available or easily done, but at least interested in like having a conversation if LRAPA could be providing municipalities and other forms of government just kind of some more information as to what exactly the air impacts are from this equipment.
Great.
So just maybe that could be a sub point in our agenda item if we are going.
Thank you for the suggestions. Yes, Director Johnson.
Thank you. Just a point of clarification. You mentioned a couple of years ago the CAC had taken this up, but was there work looking into potential regulations, or it was education around the potential benefits of switching to? I should be directing my question to you.
All right. Yeah, well, it's a combination of both.
Okay.
So based on our review and talking with staff, the regulatory authority is not there. And so we did a lot of research trying to encourage, alternatives and to provide information about local places and that sort of thing, just so that people could and provide options to them. I think, even when we did it with the website now, there's opportunity to even spread the word even a little bit more. But our approach was education, hoping that people would. But we did a lot of research, comparing because California, there's different places that have implemented it. And the biggest impact was to businesses like landscaping businesses and people who do this for their livelihoods, and battery limitations meant they would have to have, I think we crunched the numbers on an 8-hour day if the average battery, and it was pretty extensive. And then there was a lot of concern actually raised with fires starting because of batteries. So and they only last so long. So you're actually replacing the batteries if you used it at the scale that a landscaping company would compared to a homeowner. They would actually have to replace them so often it wouldn't be financially so there was some, but it wasn't just limited to leaf blowers, chainsaws. And so this was, kind of trying to address all 2-cycle engines, but it was a mix of, education and outreach was our goal.
Thank you.
That's helpful.
Yeah. And if yes, of a comment. Thank you. Sparked a. Yes.
I was just want to share that was a few years ago, 2022, 2023. I will say, just from my anecdotal observation, if you go to the store in 2022, 2023, the amount of floor space that was dedicated to those battery opportunities for purchase, the price point was a lot more different than what it is today. And I think in those spaces, the amount of floor space that's available to electric solutions versus gas power does feel like, from my anecdotal observation, that the trend is heading toward, the market is automatically kind of driving in that direction organically.
Yeah. Helpful. My follow-up commentary. Yes. Director Kutchin.
Thanks, Chair. Just from the rural perspective, the 2-stroke is really a broad brush, as the CAC recognized, and the chainsaw portion of it is really a Firewise type thing and mitigation abilities that we have. And so I think as we look at that, and I believe it'll end up, the best we could do is offer a recommendation to the municipalities and the county. But I do believe we ought to sort of narrow it down a little bit and figure out how we can, the leaf blowers and weed whackers are kind of an urban thing that you need to look at. But out in the rural communities, a broad approach like that would really impact our ability to do some of the work that we're doing.
Thank you, Director Kutchin. I'll park my editorializing for when we have this at a future agenda item, because we have a lot to go over today, and we could spend all afternoon talking about this issue. So I think staff has picked up what the board's putting down. We would like to have this as a future agenda item, please.
Yeah.
From the aforementioned realms: regulatory, education, incentive, etc. Thank you, board members, for the spirited discussion, and thank you to the community members for participating. And I would encourage all of us to encourage our network and our community members that we engage with to provide additional public comment. I think this agency benefits from that robust, larger discussion. Approval of meeting minutes from April 9th. I'll entertain a motion to do so at this juncture.
Chair, I move that we approve the meeting minutes from April 9th, 2026.
Second.
Motion by Director Johnson, second by Director Saxon. Is there any discussion? Seeing none, all in favor, signal the affirmative or raise your hand. Aye. Any opposed? Unanimous. Citizens Advisory Committee. Kelly Wood, hello.
Hello. All right, I'll keep it short and sweet. So during our last meeting, we did a little survey for the members and asked if people would mind adding a little extra time. So most people were available, so we made it a 2-hour meeting, which allowed us to get into some more depth and meaningful discussions about the Title 43 asbestos rules. There were some people from the public who participated, and we got some really good comments, things to follow up on and to delve into a little bit more deeply, potential impacts financially and those types of things. And so staff was going to take that back and explore some of the proposed revisions. So it was really productive. It is going to be pushed into another meeting, which we all agreed is fine. It's better to take our time and do it right. But with that in mind, we also already surveyed the group for the Title 15 to see if that would be possible to make 2-hour meetings as well, so that we could really, it was very helpful to have that extra time. So, yeah.
Thank you, Chair. Does Citizens Advisory Committee need anything from this board?
Not at this time.
Okay, thank you. Without objection, we'll move on to are there any questions for Kelly? Sherwood, we appreciate your enthusiasm, your expertise, and your regular updates and your leadership. Thank you. Moving on to our approval of our financial report, Executive Director Travis Knudsen.
Yes, Chair Keating, members of the board, before you on page 21 in the board packet in the little red notes, that is the financial report for March 31st, 2026. Keeping with our practice of noting in the footnotes the notable items of where we are in the budget. The 2 footnotes are both related to personnel services, be it our general fund as well as our Title V fund or special revenue fund. We are 75% of the way through the fiscal year, and our personnel service spending for the general fund is at 69%, which means that we're at 92% of that 75. And then to same degree for the title special revenue fund, the Title V fund, personnel services is at 90% of what is the 75% way through the fiscal year. We have April, March or April month reconciliation that will be underway, and we'll have that report for the board next month. And I'm happy to take any questions or comments related to the financial report.
Any questions from folks online, in person? If you didn't hear it, any questions online or in person? Not seeing any. There's no action to approve the financial report, as I understand it. Or
There is.
I'll take a motion to approve the financial report.
Chair, I move that we approve the financial report from March 2026.
There a second?
I'll second.
Moved by Director Johnson, seconded by Director Saxon. Any discussion? Not seeing any. All in favor, signal the affirmative or raise your hand. Aye. Any opposed? It's unanimous. We've approved the financial report, and moving on to appoint a budget hearing officer fiscal year 26-27 budget. Travis Knudsen.
Yes, Chair Keating, members of the board, in February of 2026 of this year, prior to moving into our budget process, the board goes through a process of appointing budget committee members, as well as appointing who the budget officer is for that fiscal year. In February, Christina Ward, our finance manager, who was assigned that responsibility. I need to update the board that Christina left the organization at the end of April. And so as we move into this budget hearing here today, we do need to have a budget hearing officer for the agency. My recommendation to the board is that they appoint myself as that budget hearing officer. I was closely involved with Christina as we collectively developed a budget and presented it to the budget committee. And I feel prepared and informed enough to hold that role today.
Are there any questions or suggestions? Director Saxon.
I'd like to move that we appoint Travis Knudsen as the budget officer. Is that right? Budget officer for this fiscal year's deliberations on the budget.
Second.
Motion made by Director Saxon, seconded by Director Plummer. Discussion. Put myself in the queue ever so briefly. God forbid paint a bleak picture, but you're hit by that truck.
Yeah.
Who's your pro temp? Who's your deputy who could fill, who you would suggest this board fill that role in the event you're incapacitated?
In that event, that would be Administrative Manager Rochelle Nicholas, who's over there as the first step into that. But I would say that holistically, it would be a large group lift from the managers that we have in the organization, including Max Huffley, who's been with us for many years, over the decades. Lance Giles, who is technically on PTO today, but plugged in for this. Colleen Wagstaff also has been with us for a very long time. And then Matt Sorensen as our public affairs manager collectively would be able to navigate whatever adversity would come their way. And I'll try to steer clear from
That's
those
it.
lessons.
The deep bench of the.
LRAPA has continued to have success over many years because we as an organization are able to provide, I think, a solid, reliable, meaningful place of work for individuals who then commit their careers to the organization. And it's through that commitment and loyalty that we have managed to be successful despite transition that happens and is healthy for any organization.
Thank you for that, for externalizing that succession, just in the event. Don't get hit by.
I'll try not to, yeah.
Okay, any other discussion? Not seeing any. All in favor of appointing Travis Knudsen as budget hearing officer fiscal year 26-27 budget, signal the affirmative.
Aye.
Any opposed? Whereas, just to be clear, Brian, is that in opposition or in support?
In support. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. It is unanimous. Just wanted to clarify for the record. Great, congratulations, Travis.
Thank you.
Resolution, I'm sorry, we're gonna have a public hearing at this juncture on the proposed fiscal year 26-27 budget adoption. Before opening the public hearing on the proposed LRAPA budget for fiscal year 26-27, I do want to ask staff to provide a brief description on.
Yes, Chair Keating, members of the board. So as discussed with the Budget Committee in our Budget Committee meetings this year in March, as well as in April, the fiscal year 27-28 budget, which begins July 1st, 2026 and goes through June 30th, 2027, has approved by the Budget Committee expenditures totaling $6,008,036. Key highlights from that budget is financial stability. LRAPA has a reserves of 4 months or greater policy. This proposed budget or approved budget by the Budget Committee meets that policy. It proposes 19 FTE for the organization, a 3% cost of living adjustment, and a capital purchase of a new fleet vehicle for the organization. So that is my description of the budget for the chair.
Great, thank you. I'm prepared to open the public hearing and state the time, which would be, I'll be precise when I open the public hearing. But on our agenda, it's indicated at 12:55 p.m. I defer to the opinion of our previous chairs, Chair Emeritus Cutchin, Chair Emeritus Saxon. When faced with this in the past, did you move on and open a hearing when appropriate because it was already on the agenda?
We did, because the times are approximate, so that's what we've done.
That's what I thought. I just want to get the temperature of my colleagues. Director Cutchin, that's your experience as well?
Yes, it is, Chair. It is.
Without objection, then I will open the public hearing at 12:54 p.m. Executive Director Knudsen, would you place into the hearing record the affidavit of publication from the Eugene Register Guard proving that the notice of this hearing was published according to Oregon budget?
Yes, Chair Keating, members of the board, as Matt is sharing here on the screen, this is our affidavit of publication of our public hearing that was published on May 4th for the Register Guard. We, as a council of governments, do not have to publish a full LB1 form in our paper in the way municipalities do, but this is our affidavit of publication required by our budget law for council of governments, of which LRAPA is.
Great, thank you. Does anyone wish to speak to the matter of this particular public hearing, fiscal year 26-27 budget? If so, please state your name and address. You'll have 3 minutes if any member of the public including but not limited to our board. Anyone online? Anyone in the audience? Not seeing any. We will now close the public hearing at 12:45 p.m. And there were no substantive changes to the budget. No changes are necessary. And I'm gonna, at this juncture, entertain a motion regarding the proposed adoption of the aforementioned budget. Director Saxon.
I move that the LRAPA board adopt resolution 26-03, which would adopt the FY 26-27 budget and making appropriations.
Second.
It's been moved and seconded. Moved by Director Saxon, seconded by Director Johnston. Any suggestions or questions, comments, commentary? One online. Yeah, Director Plummer.
I would like to just say thank you to our lovely voluntary budget committee. That was very helpful in constructing this budget. And the staff, I thought it was a good process, great process, and it's just been improving year after year. So I appreciate that. And I want to recognize all the work that's going into that. So thank you.
Thank you. And agreed. Kudos. And there's a lot of head nods for those who are watching online. Director Cutchin.
Thank you, Chair. And Travis, this is the eternal question you'll get every budget cycle, but and thank you for the work that everyone did here. But what do you see as the challenges moving forward in the budget process for LRAPA?
Thank you, Director Cutchin. I appreciate the opportunity to speak to this. I would say that our policy of 4 months of reserve is being met. So from that perspective, the budget is for this fiscal year physically sound. There is a challenge in revenue growth versus increase in costs that in time is going to, without being addressed in some form, create financial challenges for the organization. That's where I'm grateful and appreciative of the board's opportunity to bring forward revenue potential and opportunities in June for discussion there. From a federal perspective, EPA Region 10, the amount of Clean Air Act federal funding that was provided that's being allocated to this fiscal year versus prior fiscal years is $70,000 than last fiscal year to the entire Region 10. So not seeing a lot of growth in that place. And so trying to find other creative opportunities to improve revenue for this organization would be important for the long-term success of our agency.
Director Saxon.
Just one
Unless-
comment.
Excuse me, Director Saxon, unless Director Cutchin has a follow-up.
Oh, I'm sorry.
I'd just like to thank Travis for his observations.
Director Saxon.
Yeah, just to kind of memorialize at the budget committee meeting last month, and as well as the board meeting, I think there was consensus that the staff and the board undertake an evaluation of looking at not only revenue sources, but just the whole budget as it relates to reserve fund, as the projected finances of the organization through the next 3 or 4 years indicated a decline in the reserve budget. And everyone, I think, agreed that that was concerning. And so hopefully the board and staff will start looking at that prior to the next budget cycle.
Yes, to respond, I understand what you're speaking to, and the challenge of the general fund decreasing. While at the time we have an increase in our Title V fund, and so that's a matter of allocation between the programs for us. But both funds included with increasing costs, there is a makeup that we need to be focusing on and considering what approaches are.
Including but not limited to partnerships with DEQ.
Right, exactly.
Any other questions for Executive Director Knudsen? Or to related to this motion? Okay, not seeing any. All in, we still haven't voted, just to be clear, right, Matt Sorensen?
No, we've got the motion in a second.
Thank you. Okay, closing conversation, and all in favor of the motion, signaling affirmative. Aye. Any opposed? It's unanimous. We've adopted the proposed budget for fiscal year 26-27. Thank you.
And Brian gave a thumbs up.
Yep, thank you.
Chair, thank
Great.
you. Board.
Thank you. So update, I hand it over to Executive Director Travis Knudsen.
Yes, Chair Keating, members of the board, I appreciate the opportunity to engage with the board on what was an item that began at the end of last calendar year, moving into this year, related to an audit finding that we had. The board passed in January resolution 2601, which was a corrective action plan for audit finding 2501, which was a repeat finding of 2024 audit. Was classified as a material weakness in internal controls over financial reporting. What this connects to is our Cassell software financial system transfer or conversion. We began using Cassell as our accounting system on July 1st, 2024. Through that conversion, we recognize an error in our subsidiary ledgers for our accounts receivable and accounts payable, and how those on the programming side of the software map to the general ledger. In 2024, auditors recommended some adjustments to our books of 91,000 to correct for this mismapping of the subsidiary ledger to the general ledger. In fiscal year 25, that number was 89,726. So an improvement, but still a present issue. When this was presented to the board in the end of this year, following our most recent audit, passed resolution 2601, which committed to two actions. The first was to correct that subsidiary ledger challenge with the Cassell software, as well as an update on bank reconciliations on a monthly basis, which were at the time delayed and behind for the board. So the update for today is that April 30th completion date passed without full resolution. Our monthly reconciliations have been caught up through March. Now we're in May, so April is pending still, but that is something I believe will be completed before the next board meeting. But the larger issue of addressing Cassell and our back-end subsidiary mapping, that is not a resolution that I can report to the board. We engaged with Cassell in early April when we had those bank reconciliations caught up, because that was an important step in doing that mapping. And we were unable to meet that April 30th deadline. With our financial manager transition underway, I do not anticipate that we will be able to resolve this audit finding for this fiscal year, because what it will require is a financial manager in-house who is able to reconcile our monthly needs on an ongoing basis, while at the same time having a conversation with Cassell to understand where this mismapping is taking place so it can be resolved. Moving forward with that financial manager transition, we are prepared to move forward with bank reconciliations. I've connected with the Lane Council of Governance to try to establish some financial oversight support for us in terms of, before we make a journal entry, before we reconcile a month, what is the financial perspective we're getting to make sure that we are making informed decisions in the process that we are doing. The administrative manager, Rochelle Nicholas, and myself are dividing up those responsibilities that the financial manager had in the interim. We have a audit that is something we're preparing for, and an interim audit, because we are changing our audit firm. And we have hired Eric Kaitola, a CPA who has provided support to Oak Ridge, has also provided support to us in the past. His team is helping us move forward with pulling our data and being prepared for that interim audit, so we can have a successful audit with the new team as we conclude this fiscal year. Our replacement position for the financial manager was posted on April 27th. Applications close tomorrow, May 15th. And as of this morning, we've had over 40 applicants apply.
Wow.
So a large pool to sort through. I'm optimistic that we have some strong candidates in that pool, and I look forward to bringing a further update to the board.
That's for the chief financial officer position?
Correct.
I have a quick question, but I want to see if other board members do before I insert myself in the queue. Not seeing any. What are the perils, pitfalls, or dangers of not meeting?
It is disappointment in my capacity to meet a commitment that I have made to the board that I was unable to meet. As far as a tangible consequence to us for not making that, that is, if the board deems that there is an appropriate consequence, then it is up to you to decide, but there's no external force requiring us to meet that April 3rd deadline.
Thank you for that
April 30th.
clarification. Any other questions or comments? Yes, Director Johnson.
Thank you, Chair. So Travis, who is doing the, I guess, to back up a bit, the issue, the underlying issue has been with the reconciliations, not of cash or bank accounts, but with accounts payable and accounts receivable. Is that the the reconciliations that have been kind of the root cause here?
Yeah, so to explain in my understanding, we have our general ledger. When we report a report and when we report out to the board on the numbers, that is pulling from our general ledger. Within Cassell, there is a ledger for accounts payable when we're making a payment, and accounts receivable when receiving a payment. And each of those has its own ledger in of itself. And then there's a point in the reconciliation process where that data gets mapped onto the general ledger.
Yep.
And where this item goes to the general ledger in the coding of the software system, it's sending it to the wrong bucket, essentially. And the way to resolve this is we as an organization have our monthly reconciliation caught up. So we can say, here is what it should look like, and here is what Cassell is reporting, and engaging with Cassell software engineers on going through each item line by line. In the prior fiscal year, that exercise was done and presumed to have been completed. But then as we went through this fiscal year, found that that was not the case. It is something that when this organization is able to ongoingly maintain our monthly reconciliations on a good, healthy progress, we would be able to see and recognize that discrepancy before we engage with others. And that's part of what I'm feeling very optimistic in bringing in financial oversight that can help us bring that stability and reliability to our revenue.
So if I may ask a follow-up, in the interim, are the monthly reconciliations, are those on hold? Are they being done by someone else?
We can, in our own process, go through that monthly reconciliation in terms of here is the month of April and what we know versus transactions. When it is then being posted to our general ledger for Cassell, which are the items that we turn into the auditors, that is where that mark is something we'll have to meet. So it's something that doesn't prevent us from reconciling each month per se, but it will prevent us from closing out the fiscal year. If we close out the fiscal year without this being addressed, then that will result in another finding. So depending on the timeline of a new financial manager at the organization, the fiscal year closes June 30th, and the auditors are scheduled to be on site in August. I have a meeting with the auditors next week as a check-in to see where some of our pre-audit prep work is. So if that timeline needs to be adjusted, we will see. But we're at a key point without key staff. And so a lot of that work will be held up until we're able to get that subject matter expertise.
Okay. And are we doing like bank reconciliations, like reconciliations of cash still on a monthly basis?
Every week we have our cash flow analysis where we look at, what is our aging report, the checks that we have that are waiting to pend out, how much do we have in our checking versus our LGIP savings account, and what are the revenue that's coming in or the things that have not yet posted to see is that checking account enough, or if we need to make any movements there. And then on a month-to-month reconciliation process, it is a matter of going through what all of our transactions were for the month and comparing the invoice versus the receipt to note if we have any things that need to be reconciled. And if we do, we're noting or planning to note and recommend that we make a journal entry to adjust this, but that is not something that we will do without, whether it's interim financial management support on those recommendation of journal entries, or we have that financial manager brought on board. I do not plan for us to do any reconciliations of the month with journal entries without that external perspective.
Okay, thank you.
And Director Cutts.
Thanks, Chair. Just a couple of comments. Oak Ridge went through this exact same transition that LRAPA almost simultaneously, really, but and we experienced the same mapping difficulties that LRAPA is experiencing. So I understand the problem, and I believe that can be worked through. But I do, endorse Eric Kaitola, who worked for us for a time as our financial manager, to help LRAPA get through this process, because it's not easy. It's an IT issue between two financial accounting systems that don't sync up. So I guess I asked the board to bear with them and see if, and work with Eric to make sure that we can get this thing resolved, and then finally get another CFO that can come in and take over this thing. But thank you.
Thank you, Director Petchin. I interpreted it as iPhone versus Android, or Google Calendar versus Outlook. Is that a layperson's way of wrapping their head around
I would
two systems?
I think that what it comes down to is a lot of times software developers, such as a finance software company, hires developers to build their software for them. And these developers are also the same individuals who onboard financial staff. And sometimes there can be a miscommunication and understanding between where the software speaks one language and the financial skill set speaks another language. And I think that is where some of that miscommunication. In our particular instance, I believe that our mismatching came from financial manager transition that was underway as we were in parallel making our transition from Sage, our prior software system, into Cassell, our current financial software system. That was added extra complexity to today's problem.
Yes.
Just one follow-up question. Does it feel like that switch from Sage to Cassell has still been the right decision, and it's been 10 steps forward and now 1 step back here, or is this causing you to reevaluate the move to Cassell?
I would say that as of more recently, when Cassell has been connected and operating in the sort of automatic way where you push the button and it does the items for you, it is wonderful.
Okay.
The challenge comes with that all of those needs of getting it set up and adjusted to specifically our needs. When it's not in that space, it does create extra work, to where there are reflections of it feels like QuickBooks would be a nice solution here.
Yeah.
For the long term, Maine Council of Governments uses Cassell, Oak Ridge uses Cassell. I believe there's another city down south that uses Cassell as well. So it's growing. I think there's a lot of positive benefit to it. The amount of transactions that LRAPA has, is Cassell that software service that would meet the need? I think going into that same decision again today, we would maybe have a more informed perspective. But where we're at now and the quickest route to resolution, I do not think it's to consider changing then yet again to a different financial system.
Every accounting system is terrible. I should try to find the least terrible one for your purposes.
What I will say I have appreciated, and this appreciation goes broadly to just LRAPA in general, but it has been meaningful and I think healthy to go through the learnings that I have. What has been a lot of relying on a financial manager to handle a lot of this work of what is that bank reconciliation? What does it actually mean, a subsidiary ledger? The growth and the learning that has been required as I take on these responsibilities, it has been hard, but meaningful. And I think holistically will be really good for the organization in terms of, as we bring in a new finance manager, having gone through a reconciliation process myself with Robbie Robinson, who is our finance specialist. She has AP/AR down. It's more just a matter of that technical expertise in, do we make a journal entry? Is this the right entry to be making? I feel out of my depth on that on my own, which is why we're seeking external support through LCOG or other places that may be able to assure us that the actions we think we need to do in that reconciliation process is the right thing to do.
Not seeing any other questions, we can close the Cassell update conversation and move on to air toxics and cleaner air Oregon. Executive Director Knut.
Yes, this is a presentation which I enjoyed doing and providing. Matt put this together for me, so thank you, Matt, for. So this came from a prior board meeting where it was expressed interest in understanding Cleaner Air Oregon, as well as an update to where we're at with the system or the program in full. Click just one more time on there. There you go. So to start, we'll talk a little bit about air toxics or hazardous air pollutants, depending on how you are framing it from what perspective. But air toxics are pollutants that have an increase in cancer or other negative health effects. These are items that are different from particulate matter. So when we're talking about wildfire smoke and we're speaking to the air quality index, that is a conversation around particulate matter, which is a pollutant that's regulated under the Clean Air Act, the criteria pollutant, to which there's 6 of. Air toxics are separate from those criteria pollutants. These can be things that tend to be maybe a bit more chemically or gaseous. Ozone or not ozone, formaldehyde, for an example, is an example of air toxics. So in Oregon, we have health protective standards that we use to evaluate those air toxics. So there is an impact criteria where Oregon establishes a standard from different health studies of inhaled pollutants, and they come up with different values based on exposure to those pollutants. So there's an acute exposure, an acute health risk, where we say in the short-term basis, what is the potential health impact? And then there's also a chronic health risk that we look for when we're monitoring, which is where it's assumed that if an individual is to breathe this pollutant for every day for 70 years of their lives, what is that potential health risk? What is that potential cancer rate that could create? And that is what establishes these air toxic reference values, or TRVs. And that's essentially a mechanism that is used to judge based on a chronic, long-term, or acute, short-term, and cancer, non-cancer risk. Is the pollutant and the quantity that's being measured, is that of health concern to the community that's breathing the ambient air? So here is a look at some of the air toxics monitoring we have in Lane County. I will let the board know that we had 2 air toxic samplers that we had in Lane County. Our long-term site has been at Highway 99, which is the data that you're seeing here, Highway 99 in Elmira. The notable pollutants you see here on the screen are items that we say are sort of the pollutants of concern, you could say, here in Lane County. LeGrand, Portland, West Eugene, and Springfield are noted there. Formaldehyde is something that is very notable. Vehicle exhausts, wildfires, and wood stoves are all sources of formaldehyde. And then benzene and acetaldehyde is known from vehicle exhausts.
May I ask it, and if vehicle exhaust is presenting such a danger, would, from a regulatory standpoint, would this agency have any authority, as I suspect a couple municipalities or counties, I'm unclear, in the state, but certainly our neighbors to the south, the state of California, have regulated via smog checks. What would the role of either LRAPA or DEQ be in a state where there's some, but it's minimal oversight, but our neighbors to the north and the south clearly are regulating appropriately? If we're tracking carcinogens or we're tracking dangerous pollutants coming from vehicles, for example, what's our role potentially?
Yeah, so this is a great question, and it's one that comes up a lot and says, well, what is our statutory authority to say we see pollution in the air and we want to do something about it? Under the Clean Air Act, the criteria pollutants that I mentioned is what the Clean Air Act is most prominently focused on and regulating. And so in instances where there can be vehicle inspection programs, that comes from a recognition on the federal level where they say this area in the country is not meeting federal standards for a particular criteria pollutant. In Oregon's case, that's ozone. Ozone is not part of the air toxics that we are monitoring for here. So the approach is there's elevated ozone. The state says, we believe it's related to vehicles. And so then they come up with programs to get at that vehicle emissions. I think to addressing what you're speaking to here in mobile emissions from specifically vehicles, that is a federal regulatory approach in the United States, and that's done through engaging with manufacturers and setting standards on, as new vehicles are rolling off the factory line, how efficient and how clean are those vehicles. And that is a thing that California oftentimes was leading the charge, but more recent federal changes are adjusting how those standards may be set for car manufacturers.
I think you need to, one way to address, I think, Mr. Keating's question is on a formaldehyde, for example, what is the source apportionment of the different categories? I mean, it's an industrial component. There's wildfires, there's burning wood at homes, and then there's the mobile emission. And I would say that 8.81, it's not all mobile emissions from cars. It's maybe 10% of it or 20%. I don't know what the number is.
Yeah,
but you have that data. I mean, because if you look at LeGrand, well, very high, but that's not cars. That's probably wildfires and things like that. So so I think it'd be helpful in explaining these numbers where it's like, someone sees that and it's like, oh my God, West Eugene, right up in formaldehyde. Well, where is that coming from? Part of it's probably from wood products and, making plywood and things like that, because they use formaldehyde containing glues. And then some of that obviously is vehicle emissions, and the rest is, probably wood combustion.
We could use a pie graph to better
Yes,
illustrate.
exactly.
And
That's slide 4.
items like vegetation decomposition,
Sure.
And like arsenic as well, being the Pacific Northwest, the volcanic components to our area, we have arsenic that's
In the soil.
natural to our environment. Yeah.
Director Pluff.
Yeah, I mean, to Chair Keating's initial point, I would be interested in having a conversation around, if I'm understanding you correctly, Director Knudsen, that there's a Clean Air Act criteria pollutant regulatory angle on ozone regulation on mobile sources like vehicles, right? That LRAPA could potentially exercise.
If there's an exceedance, if an area is in non-attainment with the criteria pollutant standard set, then the state can come up with their program that's federally approved. It's called the State Implementation Plan. In Oregon, so Portland and Medford have vehicle inspection programs, and that's because monitoring in those areas showed potential non-attainment or non-attainment with the ozone standard. So DEQ recognized, well, what are the sources of this ozone? We think it's from our combustion vehicles. So they came up with the VIP inspection program that the EPA then said, we like this approach, we approve this approach, and then they implemented the program to resolve that issue. Under hazardous air pollutants, when you're talking about it on a federal level, or toxic air contaminants on the state level, these pollutants are not regulated in that same approach.
And I guess maybe I just push back slightly in that it's my understanding that local air agencies have the authority, one, to submit plans for state implementation plans to the federal government, and then two, that they can act to regulate criteria pollutants, even if they're not in non-attainment, but in order to maintain attainment, right? So they can proactively establish pollution regulations, even if they haven't hit a point of non-attainment. That's my understanding.
Yeah, no, I think you got that right.
Right, and I know we're on a tangent here, not talking about air toxics anymore. My other question specifically around the air toxics is like, obviously there's to kind of dispersed sources of these sources of pollution, but then to a point that was made earlier, it seems like there's probably some like very specific, like kind of point source emitters of this pollution. And I'm curious, like, are we not capturing some of that because we have such a kind of limited amount of kind of emissions testing, right? Like where, like, for example, like the paper mill in Springfield might be like a major source of an emission, hypothetically, right? But we have a testing facility or an air tester, air monitor somewhere across the city that might be picking up like some level of it, but we wouldn't be picking up like the source. Is that correct?
Yeah, I will, for one, I'll say that what you're seeing here is ambient air.
Right.
So it's really difficult to point out a single point
Right.
source in that. We only have our one air toxics monitoring sampling site, which is in West Eugene. We prior had 2 air toxic samplings that we had to retire as lab work became inaccessible to the LRAPA, the organization.
Right.
And the, I think having this in places where you're near combustion or industry sources is important. So you can get at some of that insight as well as where there are people living. And so West Eugene, I think, is a appropriate place for our current site because of the residential and industrial connections to one another.
Can I ask one more question? Which is, where are we getting the Springfield data if we have? Is that just the old site that has been retired?
Our most recent, for 1 year, we had at Springfield Youth Farm, up closer to the Gateway neighborhood. We had that monitored there for a year. And then that is when we were unable to support 2 air toxic sampling sites. One of the things too to note about this kind of data when you're doing a air sampling data. So when we talk about particulate matter, which we're really accustomed to seeing on the fire and smoke map, the numbers change every hour, every couple of minutes because it's ongoing. When we're doing air toxic sampling, there's this item called like a Suma canister. There's also like a foam where you breathe or you push air through this container, put into the container over a day or a period of time. And then that gets shipped off to a laboratory where they do analysis of it. Oregon Department of Environmental Quality does our lab work for us as a cost-saving effort. It is a bit slower because they have their own lab that goes through that. So our Springfield data came from that youth-filled site that we had in 2023.
Got it. Thank you.
And I think
What is on the vertical axis there? What are these numbers? Number of people in a million? Like
so
what does 8.81 represent on
on the y-axis, that is the number of people in a million who is believed or determined could have a cancer diagnosis over that chronic health risk exposure, believing that someone is breathing these emissions every day for 70 years.
Okay.
What is that potential increase in cancer in 1 in a million? And that's what those numbers are that you see on the screen.
Based on what we're seeing, this is the number of people in a million who are expected to get cancer based on this level of exposure over 70 years. Okay, thank you.
I would follow up. This is a 2024 air toxics monitoring result. When we compared 25 to this graph for these communities, and probably Portland and maybe less West Eugene, but certainly if it was downtown Eugene, would you see a spike in any of these bars based on non-lethal ways to, I guess, control demonstrations?
Well, I think I know a little bit what you're going to hear, Director Keating. So this next slide may speak a little bit more to in temporal, and I think also Director Plummer. This is showing just our West Eugene sites in comparison to Portland and LeGrand, and this is for the air pollutants of naphthalene. And so you can see that 28 to 2019, there was a large increase in naphthalene that was reported on our monitoring site, and then over time, a decrease. And then in 2022 to 2023, another sizable decrease. And so this is ambient air monitoring. So it is very difficult to say that there is one particular point source that's responsible to any of the data or trend that we observe. But in West Eugene, where this data was located, we know that there was a wood treatment facility in West Eugene that produced naphthalene. And in our data that we see here, the narrative with that wood treatment facility, J.H. Baxter, which closed in 2022, their operations align with some of the data that we're observing here in our ambient air monitoring.
Okay, any of these carcinogens in, I hear that about wood products.
Yeah.
Are any of these carcinogens in the non-lethal smoke or means that law enforcement use to control demonstrators or riots?
I am uncertain of all the different forms of pollutants or materials or components that can be in some of those, like gas that's used against demonstrations, those items. I am not informed of what the chemistry components of those are, so I'm not sure.
Would our monitoring system pick them up?
Well, the monitoring is looking for, we're sampling for TAPs, which is a number of different items. And this is located in Highway 99 and West Eugene. If there was any use of those in the vicinity, we certainly would probably see a spike on that. It would take some time before we got that data back to us. And is it going to be at such the level of detail that on one afternoon we can note that? That would be tough. Also, we do the sampling once every 6 days, so it's not an ongoing item. It's once a week, essentially. We go out, we fill the Suma canister or the foam, whatever the case may be, and we ship it off to the lab work. Something that can be more specific and immediate in when we're seeing those items take place, wherever they may be, is through some of that particular air monitoring, where it is more responsive. But that is just telling you the size of a particle in the air, not so much necessarily the makeup of what that is.
Just need to get an MSDS sheet on what's in tear gas.
Director Johnson.
Is there a type or types of cancer that is believed caused or believed to be caused by exposure to these, or is it a general increase in all types of cancers?
Well, in part of the review of setting of that toxics reference value, that is part of the kind of, it's a you don't want to overspeak in terms of mislabel it, but a group of
And I realize you're not an MD, so.
doctors who come together and then they have conversations, they look at peer review studies and they say, you know, like, what is the health impact? What do we know objectively so we can set what this TRV is in terms of determining what the risk is? So I can't speak to that, but in terms of the determining what the toxics reference value is, a part of the process and coming up with that is kind of that question that you're asking.
I don't know if you know that, like, I guess what I'm asking is like, is this always translated into lung cancer, or is it all types of cancers that
all
there's
types of
increase in? Yeah, okay.
Including lymphoma, which is what my mother passed away from in 2025, and she was diagnosed right around a certain spike that we see in front of us, and lived in West Eugene.
At the federal level, there's an interagency, and I can't remember the acronym, but it's the Health and Human Services and EPA and Public Health get together and come up with these numbers, you know, and it's supposed to be peer reviewed and all that. And by the way, this current federal administration is looking at rolling back a lot of the levels of protection from current levels in their efforts to deregulate. So that's a concern from a health standpoint.
Can I ask one more question? Sorry. So you said that we had decided that we didn't have we had decided to reduce our air toxic testing facilities. Was that because of a budget shortfall of not being able to afford to have the testing being done by DEQ?
Yeah, so we can, LRAPA can choose to use and hire our own third-party lab to do our laboratory. We would get turnaround times that would be faster on that, but it would be at a much higher cost. DEQ, as a service to Oregon as a whole, provides that lab work for us. We had 2 air toxic samplers, and DEQ was unable to keep up with that extra lab work for that second sampler. And so now we have just the one at the West Eugene site, as opposed to this other one that we were able to move around, which has some flexibility to that. If LRAPA was to resume some of that, that lab work would be a cost to the organization that we would have to figure out and take on.
Is there an interest from staff to like maybe aspire towards resuming having that second facility? And like maybe that's something we could consider ahead of the next budget of thinking about what that additional cost might be. I mean, it seems like it's just an important issue, and especially with J.H. Baxter and all the controversy around that, like if there's things that we can be doing to identify bad actors in the community that are putting out carcinogens, like, I mean, I think it's at least worth a conversation on the budget. Not saying that, you know, I don't want to speak on behalf of the board saying that there's consensus here, but I'd be interested in having that conversation, especially if staff is interested, if you think that would be a useful service for the agency?
I think there's a lot of value in monitoring and understanding what is the makeup of the environment in which we're breathing, so we can identify issues and begin working on problems to solve them. I think there's a lot of value there. In our current budget, the vast majority of our expenditures is in personnel, service, and staff. And so without a change in revenue opportunities, where might we be able to pull some funding to bring that service back to Lane County is from a category that I am resistant to wanting to pull from.
Totally fair. Yeah, I don't want to limit our personnel either. Maybe if we're successful in our conversations about revenue generation. Sorry.
CSC Chair Wood, you're at the table. Welcome the engagement.
I'm sure Travis will get to it, but just to reassure you too, individual sources have requirements under their permits for their own testing.
Mhm.
So there is other testing going on. I also think something that might be of interest to you is to compare when they had the two units up and running, the differences of results, because it's my recollection, we did a field trip out to it and whatnot, but the mobile unit there wasn't a huge difference between the results, which was also another reason that I think that it was like a decision that it helped with the financial decision, because the west location definitely was the worst of them, but they were so close. It wasn't a
The
big
margin of error, you could say, is within noise of just general kind of sometimes a little bit more, sometimes a little bit less. Yeah.
difference. Okay, that was my recollection. So
Thank you.
helpful.
That's helpful.
So if there are no further programs on our ambient air monitoring, this is a shift into Clean Air Oregon, which is the state authority, not federal authority, that we have. That's the program designed to regulate this type of air pollution in our region. So Clean Air Oregon is a program that was adopted by Governor Brown in 2019, 2018, somewhere around there. So on the regulatory scope, not necessarily a new program, but still newer. It requires industrial facilities to assess and reduce air toxic contaminants. So on the federal perspective, they call them hazardous air pollutants, and of which there's 188 different pollutants that they list. Under Oregon, we call them toxic air contaminants, which is over 600 different air toxic contaminants. And Clean Air Oregon is regulating to those 600 different forms of air toxic contaminants. This is a state program that we adopt state rules by reference. So how Oregon broadly runs and implements this program, we follow suit. So broadly, the way the program works is we get with industrial source and we say, tell us of these 600 different pollutants that are coming out of your facility, how much is coming out, what is the quantity? And then we assess risk. So once we understand that inventory of pollutants and we are able to model where they go, so where does it move across the region, who's breathing it, and how much are they breathing it, how long are they breathing it? And with that information, it's able to be determined what that potential health risk is to that nearby community. And depending on what that risk is, we have state authority to require the source to do things differently until that risk is lowered to a deemable or acceptable level. So the key elements of health risk is two parts. We look at the toxicity. So how harmful is something to you? And then how much are you being exposed to that pollutant? And through the combo of those two, that's how we're able to determine how much of a potential risk is presented. So under Clean Air Oregon, once we go through with the source to determine what that potential health risk is, you'll notice, I'll just stand up to make this easier. So each of these lines represents a different threshold in which we have more authority to require something different of a source. So if it is above that lowest line, that's when we have the authority to say you need a permit condition, which can be you're going to limit how much of a product you make. You might install a pollution control, whatever that circumstance may be, if that risk is above that line. If it's above this next line, then it's above the community engagement level. That is where we would go through and say to the community, FYI, there's a source nearby you. Here's what's going on. What are your questions? Please participate in the public process as this permit is issued. And then above these next line, the TBAC level. So that's where we say, okay, what pollution control devices are available, or what parts of your process can you change from a best practice perspective to lower risk to that level? And then there's the risk reduction level, where if it's above that line, LRAPA will not issue a permit to the source. So Clean Air Oregon essentially helps us for some of these pollutants, which are not as heavily regulated under the federal authority, and to which there is some rollback of authority. On the state level, we're still, from a health-focused perspective, engaging with sources. I'll note, which I forgot to mention, if you are a new facility, so you're starting up, you're brand new, you will hit these lines of health risk sooner, or their low risk is considered to be lower and acceptable. Because if you're new, you're building new equipment, you have new items, those should create less risk. If you're an existing facility, your risk levels are higher, or you have more risk that can be presented before we have authority to regulate beyond that. And so this slide here gives an insight into the Clean Air Oregon program in Lane County. So again, there's two different ways that you could look at sources, whether it's a new source or whether it's an existing source. So all the businesses that were operating before Clean Air Oregon was established, they would be considered existing. If it's new, then it goes through those more stringent levels of review. So in our emissions inventory and source testing phase, which is oftentimes the longest and hardest part of the process, because if we don't have a complete inventory, if we don't have an accurate set of what all those pollutants are and what's coming out, then when we're doing our health risk assessment, we will have a gap. We'll miss what that potential health risk is. So diligence and making sure we have a complete emissions inventory is very important for a successful Clean Air Oregon program. Then we can go through the modeling and risk assessment work plan, where we look at who's breathing these emissions, how much are they breathing. Then we're in that risk assessment phase where we're understanding what is that potential risk. So the two sources that are at stage right now is Hexion, which is located in Springfield, and A&K Metal Fabrication, which is out closer to Junction City, north of Eugene. And then the risk reduction is a process that will go through facilities that are already existing to say, what are you doing changing to your facility to lower that level? Not applicable to new facilities because they're new. And then on the permitting side, that is all of the sources that have completed the Clean Air Oregon program and have then received their normal permitting process beyond that. I will note, though, that Arkimoto and J.H. Baxter are no longer in operation in the county. So that's an update on where our Clean Air Oregon process is. All facilities go through Clean Air Oregon, or the vast majority of facilities go through Clean Air Oregon. And for existing facilities, we have a call-in list where in different groups we are calling in sources and saying, it's your turn to go through this process. That is the last slide there. Yes, so happy to talk about air toxics, or then the program, the state program that we use to regulate and make progress on improving the air shed from those pollutants.
Am I just understanding correctly? Could you go back a slide? You know, I know you said that the emissions inventory and source testing is the most time consuming, but like for both international and Pacific recycling, have they been in that process for like since the program was initiated in 2018, 2019?
No, we got an emissions inventory to review and potentially approve from Pacific Recycling in December of 2025. And then international paper. Max, do you have on top of your head when IP was called into Clean Air Oregon?
So we called IP International Paper into Clean Oregon right after we issued their Title V renewal in January of 2024. So they had 90 days to get that. One of the rules, they have 90 days to get the emission inventory. I believe they submitted that to us in a timely manner. They might have gotten an extension or two, but so yeah, we've gone through it, an initial review, and provided our questions. They've responded to that, and so the ball's in our court to prove that emission inventory.
Great, thank you. And then what kind of timeline do we anticipate to get from the emissions inventory and source testing to permitting for those two sources? And I guess for the other two that are in risk assessment as well.
That's a challenging question to answer. And part of the process is because Clean Air Oregon is designed also to give sources opportunity and options to consider how they want to go about moving through the program. So if as they look at their current operations and we get information from them and they model and they see what that potential risk is, then that becomes more of a conversation or a decision point for the facility of how they might want to move through the program. When you're determining your risk, we always start with the most assuming health protective assumptions we can make, which a lot of times will result in high risk. And so when we see that, oftentimes a facility will say, well, instead of just jumping to let's install or make investments into what we're doing, let's spend more time going through our health conservative assumptions and maybe make them more accurate and less over-assuming in health assumptions. And with that, that can then lower that risk. So it is a bit of we have the ability to, through enforcement mechanism, spur a source to move along more quickly if we need that to be the case. But really it's the source is just as much in the driver's seat of their agency over their business and how they want to be responsive to this program that ultimately is just getting at how can we reduce air emissions.
Sorry, one more question. I'll pass it. Is just so, for example, like, let's say this hypothetical company is in this place, right? And they're going back and forth and they're maybe dragging their feet a little bit as to when they actually are going to kind of land on what the emissions inventory that they feel comfortable that we agree on as an agency. They're dragging their feet. They're maybe not acting in good faith. What kind of levers do we have to drive some kind of regulation if they're just not willing to be like good faith partners with us and like agreeing on like some consensus emissions inventory and in turn the risk reduction actions in the permit?
Well, I would say that we have a mechanism that we can, if we need to, require through enforcement more responsiveness from the source. I think that broadly, though, I appreciate a generosity of perspective where we approach our sources with the goal that we oftentimes, in most of the case, recognize that we don't want to have a negative impact on our natural resources, and sources are oftentimes very engaged and cooperative in that process. But as Max mentioned, like with International Paper, he said that we have 90 days. Once we call them in, they have 90 days to get us their emissions inventory. They can't ask for extensions for that, but throughout the program itself, written into statute, we have timelines that we can use as items to enforce upon if we make that discretion.
And then I'm assuming like if they're not meeting the timelines and we're not granting exemptions, then we're like fining them.
It would move into an enforcement space where we would issue a notice of noncompliance, which then could result in a notice or an assessment of civil penalties or a stipulated final order where you get into essentially a contract with the source to say, here's what we need, here's what our expectations are, and this is the plan that we're going to sign to get us to those expectations.
Great, thank you.
Are there any, single-use delivery, mobile delivery systems near the airport that are applying for cleaner air?
We do not have any Cleaner Oregon applications connected to any project out in the airport, as far as I'm aware at this moment. Yeah.
Do you see that we will?
I know that the city of Eugene is open to new businesses coming in, and I think a big part of the value that LRAPA brings to Lane County is more opportunity to engage with those sources and help them move through some of these programs so they can move on with their business. We would be very interested to engage with any source that has a Cleaner Oregon application because they are setting up business in West Eugene, but at the moment, that conversation is not, as far as I'm aware.
Yes, Director Saxon.
Yeah, this might be a question for Max. I'm getting down the weeds, but so like all these sources have permits, just their air contaminant discharge permits, and so that sets limits and might set the quantity of materials they use or how many hours of operation. In Cleaner Act Oregon, is the evaluation based just on the permit limits, or are they based on potential to emit just based on the process capacity?
Sure, Saxon. So you're asking how we set risk or limits under the Clean Oregon program and how we set limits in the regular.
Right. I mean, is there a difference in what's what the facility is permitted to emit versus Cleaner Act Oregon? Are you looking at potential to emit just based on how much they can push through their process?
Yeah, so for Cleaner Oregon, we look at their potential to emit essentially. So it could be, they have a capacity to emit, which is the most they could do under the physical and operational design, assuming they emit 8,760 hours, full time. But they can choose to request a level that is lower than the capacity that keeps them out of, say, a certain risk level.
Mhm.
So they could, take production limits to keep them out of that next risk action levels.
So you can kind of look at, if you will, worst case scenario. Okay. All right. Thank you.
Discussion. Any other questions or comments? Director Settlemeyer, you've been quiet.
I'm working at
All
it.
right.
We have a budget meeting this afternoon. I'm saving it for that. So thank you.
It's all numbers.
No. We know.
Director Cutchins, I couldn't see your screen while this was being presented. Do you have any questions or comments?
Chair, no, thanks. I'm still paying attention in France, but I'm doing well and keeping up with the meeting.
I appreciate it. Thank you.
Yep.
Well, we are right on time, if not a little early. So we'll take the director's report. Thank you, Executive Director Knudsen.
Yes, Director Keating, members of the board. As always, if there's one page to read from the director's report, hopefully that's the executive summary to give you all the information that is applicable to the last month. I will note just briefly that we have some work that's taking place on the building. You may have seen some of the scaffolding that's outside. That was from an asbestos abatement project for some of the shingles on this side of the building that took place on Monday. We also have some windows on the east side of the building that is being replaced. That's part of our capital outlay plan for this year. We found, which we suspected were there, and we did find and were able to fix and replace some dry rot that was occurring on one side of the building. So grateful for that opportunity, but just an update there to some of our facilities. For the month of April, it was an exceptional air quality month across Lane County. We were in good for the whole month. I will point out, though, that if you look on that kind of the next page of the director's report, ozone was the pollutant that was driving the highest AQI that we reported for Eugene as well as for Cottage Grove. Still in that good category, but ozone season for us begins May 1st and runs through September. Or goes till September 1st, I think it's September 30th. Ozone is a secondary form of pollutant, which means that when it's hot and sunny and we have volatile organic compounds or VOCs in the air, there's a chemical reaction that takes place and ozone is created. So we monitor for that during the summer months. Outdoor burning season is open and continuing, though we hear from fire authorities that there's a lot of anxiety and concern about fire risk. So the season is open still, but I do anticipate that we will see a closure to the burn season due to fire concern here sooner rather than later. In April, the American Lung Association State of the Air Report was released. This is an annual report that the ALA publishes. LRAPA is notorious on this for generally having a very bad air quality report. The ALA's methodology for determining this, it used to be if there was any area that is not meeting attainment or not in attainment with federal standards, to which Oak Ridge once was, the county as a whole would receive a failing grade. More recently, their methodology is basically just to look at how many days of bad air quality was seen in the communities and then apply it countywide. In Oak Ridge in 2022, they had some horrific air quality related to the Cedar Creek fire, and that was breaking the curve, I guess you can say, and resulting in our poor placement on that Air and Lung Association report. For me, I do value the American Lung Association State of the Air report because it points more and more of a point on wildfire smoke and the negative contributions it's having to the airshed, to which I think us as a society have fully yet to see and reconcile. And so that is an opportunity for us to say, we need to see some collaborative kind of postures and creative solutions in the space. We did get a lot of responses and interest from that, from local media, as that report was issued. In preparation for wildfire season, there's the state wildfire smoke preseason kickoff call that happened just a few days ago in early May. The National Weather Service, Oregon DEQ, Oregon Health Authority, and local public health agencies like Lane County Public Health participate on those calls. We have the authority to issue air quality advisories for Lane County when wildfire smoke intrusions arrive, and that is our meeting place where we set those advisories. On a community engagement perspective, myself and Matt Sorensen, we met with EWEB board member Tim Morris at the end of April, looking for opportunities from ductless heat pumps as ways to reduce pollutants in residential areas through wood stoves or other forms of combustion that could be improved upon for folks' home. It was more just an exploratory, we have an interest and wouldn't this be great kind of conversation to see where there could be opportunities that align in the future. We also met with Oregon Health Authority to provide some youth air quality index guidance that we generated with Lane County Public Health that I think the state's interested in modeling more broadly for the state. Also connected with Centers for Green Schools with some of their questions that they had on indoor air quality programs that they run, and how we might be able to share information, and have engaged with the Oregon Department of Forestry on smoke management coordination and how our authority may overlap or work with ODF. As shared earlier, we did have our financial manager position go vacant at the end of April. We're moving quickly to resolve and to hire that position, looking for someone who is qualified and will be exceptional in that role. Notably, from an operations perspective, and I do plan to bring this to the board this year, is an insight into how LRAPA is using artificial intelligence in our organization and taking that resource and using it in a cautious but still supportive and helpful way to the organization. There was our financial performance. We are still remaining under budget, and we're engaged with Polly Rogers for our audit of fiscal year 26, with interim preparation underway with Eric Kaitola as our contract and support. So that's the director's report. Chair Keating, I'm happy to take questions. And then, of course, as a new item, on the board agenda is a look at the board calendar. Meeting items.
Great. Thank you, Executive Director Knudsen. I'm gonna put myself in the queue, but I'll go to Director Plummer.
Go first.
Well, thank you for directing. I appreciate deferring. I appreciate that. The wildfire piece is on my mind for a couple of reasons. I attended a League of Oregon Cities conference in Pendleton and participated in a fascinating conversation with representatives from the City of Sisters who pointed to some successes in the city of Ashland. I would encourage colleagues to look at both municipalities in regard to how they have encouraged fire-wise resiliency in their communities. And just to be perfectly transparent, and I would ask for support publicly or privately, I would hope that the fire-wise grants that are available to county residents could be expanded to municipal residents who live within close proximity, yet to be determined what that would be, a half mile or mile, whatever, to the urban rural interface. So you may not be a county resident, but you should have access to the same home hardening resources that county residents have, because wildfire doesn't care what your zip code or what your these imaginary human caused boundaries. Wildfire doesn't care. So the wildfire piece in your director's report really jumped out at me, and I circled forward the National Weather Service, and then I wrote Lane County advisories. So my question is two-pronged. I'll go back to the Weather Service in a second, but this might be a Matt Sorensen question. The Lane County advisories that are set out, are those opt-in or are they broad to all? And are those communicated via text as well as news releases, online and social engagement? How broad is the engagement when there's an advisory through our county partners? And that's question one. And question two, the one I circled, the National Weather Service, with the federal government pulling back and cutting into the good work that the National Weather Service has done for generations. It was on top of mind just yesterday as I attended the University of Oregon, a University of Oregon event around 11 o'clock in the morning. And it was on no one's radar that it was going to rain, and it rained on me. Was it on no one's radar because there were cuts to the National Weather Service? That's not necessarily my question. That's more my editorializing. But how have any cuts into the National Weather Service, how have they affected our work locally yet? And if not, how do you, if they have, how have they? And if not, how do you predict they will?
For one, to your first question, Director Keating, we issue a press release every time we are issuing a air quality advisory. We do publish on social media. Anyone who signed up for Emma, for our normal communications, they go out that way as well. Oftentimes it can be, or we have had in the past, where there is a wildfire in the Willamette National Forest, and that wildfire will be there for the next 2 months. And so when the smoke intrusions look to move into, be it Oak Ridge or be it into the Eugene Springfield area, we try to target our communications to those groups. We have a texting program in Oak Ridge where anyone who signs up for our alert notifications, they will get a direct text about that advisory, noting smoke this afternoon, make sure your windows are closed, those type items. As far as what is the potential overlap with National Weather Service?
Can I interject before we get to the National Weather Service? What percentage of the population roughly has opted in
For
these alerts?
Well, in Oak Ridge, it's about 1,000 folks, over 800 for that text alert.
Okay.
For our Emma sign up, Matt, do you have a thought of how many folks are signed up for Emma?
That's sitting at about 1,300, somewhere around there. And those are people who have requested or signed up themselves for the email communications.
Okay.
With the number of people live in Lake County, we have a long ways to go to have better saturation, but certainly have found the mix of, going through social media combined with Emma, and then combined with also people who call and ask here, they say, hey, want to know, me and my neighbors are talking. That's kind of our current way, but it's been my goal is to continue to grow our Emma specifically, because that most often means that someone is wanting us to reach out and communicate when that happens. So
Okay.
I would also add too that I don't think that we're effort in assuring that we're having a handshake with every individual about when there is an air quality advisory is the most effective use of approach. I think that we have a media strategy, which is to connect with the media entities that are inclined through advertising sort of incentives to make sure that the messaging is getting out. So I think a big part of our approach is we recognize that we need an air quality advisory. We're communicating out broadly to those who are already coming to us for information because they know we have it, but we also put a lot of effort in our media relationships so that way that message can be carried further to those who might not be within our circle. And that's a great way to bring in more of those firsthand handshakes as well.
Thankfully, we have some media savvy leadership.
Yeah.
But I would, and I wonder if my colleagues would be equally interested, without getting into the weeds operationally, like what how LRAPA plans to bolster engagement in Emma, and what the short-term goals are, what the long-term goals are, what the hurdles are, what are the advantages to participate in that system. I think it's worth having a larger conversation as fire season. It's not just around the corner; it's essentially upon us, as we had a lightning storm just the other night and got lucky.
Mm-hmm.
So I would love to learn more, and I wouldn't want to do it this afternoon as we're rapidly approaching adjournment. But I would like to request that as a future agenda item, please.
Well, and it's a good tie into your question with the National Weather Service, because they actually have a very robust alert system that kind of goes, it doesn't go necessarily directly to you, but anyone that's looking for information when we have air stagnation, when we have, they actually help us push out when we have smoke intrusions. They're another group that we work with to get that information dispersed out through their channels. So when we issue an air quality advisory, they actually help us share that out through their channels. As far as their operations, we went and visited their offices last year about this time. to their telling, they certainly have been scaled down and wish it wasn't the case. But as far as being able to meet the marks that they would like to continue to do so, they are reporting that they believe they are still able operationally to hit those marks right now. I don't know how they're doing that, but they seem to leave us with the impression that that is being accomplished right now, which was a relief because they do very important work. But I know that they're grappling with things like installing new radar and some other expensive pieces of equipment that will be immensely helpful for this section of the valley because it's much further up north by Portland. Those are things that they able to move forward on right now.
The meteorologist in charge actually is an alma mater of my graduating class, went to the same meteorology program. But she believes that the National Weather Service's stance is shifting more from that user, like the National Weather Service's page where they update it, you go and look at that. That level of service is, as they described it, a place where National Weather Service sees as pulling back because there's already marketplaces like weather.com where they can, through a commercial money generating approach, provide that information, and the National Weather Service seeing how they can be more collaborative in that interagency approach. So committed to those smoke calls that Oregon DEQ hosts, that OHA is on, where the National Weather Service starts and they say, well, here's the weather pattern, here's where we think the smoke's going and where it's blowing to. We as a group had concern about what level of capacity will we be losing from the National Weather Service. And the National Weather Service, through that engagement, the meteorologist in charge says their leadership is wanting to still be in those spaces, and where they are providing less in terms of service to the community is in that immediate direct relationship in forecast services to each one of us as individual users, because from a commercial perspective, that's already being met by the market.
Interesting.
That's so. As far as our ability to rely on the National Weather Service to give us their forecast insight on where smoke is going and wildfires on the landscape, they've committed to still being in the room for those conversations.
Great. That's a helpful commitment. How confident are you that they'll be able to execute that?
I am optimistic, and I think that they are service-oriented individuals who see the value of being there, and because of that, regardless of what their capacity changes may be, I think that's something that they're prioritizing because they're mission-oriented individuals and recognize the value they bring and will figure out a way to make it work.
There's a lot of commerce tied to their activity in the economy, be it the airport for naval or, the shipping on the water. I mean, there's a lot of stuff that is tied to that as well, which is good because it positions them to be something that is probably going to be less likely to be cut because of the importance it plays in the economy.
Nevertheless, it's a skeleton crew asking, or being asked to do more. with
Certainly,
less personnel.
certainly have been, they have far fewer staff.
Yes. All right. Thank you. Any other questions?
I'll just be very brief, but I want to say thank you to Matt and Travis for making time to meet with Timothy Morris at eWeb around the potential for heat pump installation programs, something very near and dear to my heart. I don't want to wax poetic for too long about heat pumps and heat pump hot water heaters, but we've seen them installed in Oak Ridge with great effect and in cities around the country and around the world in order to reduce air pollution, primarily NOx, which then can turn into ozone, as well as having many co-benefits, including improving indoor air and because of their air filtration qualities, as well as reducing gas use and reducing energy use generally because of their energy efficiency. So I think there's a lot of opportunities to take the expertise that LRAPA has developed with South Willamette strategies and trying to export that to other cities and communities across Lane County. And specifically, I'm interested in continuing this conversation around how we can work with other governments in the area, specifically support some of the more historically polluted places that also coincidentally have higher energy burden, higher cost of energy utility bills, things like that. And so specifically, I'm very interested in a project to try to convert the homes still using delivered fuels in West Eugene, in particular in Eugene. There are like 500 to 1,000 homes that are still using this kind of archaic form of heating. It's extremely polluting, extremely costly, and that we could be meeting our climate goals, reducing air pollution, and reducing energy bills. So I'm eager to just keep exploring that. And I think there's lots of potential for intergovernmental collaboration on that front, especially if any new sources of funding were to come online in the near future.
Thank you. We're kind of segueing from the director's report into future board agenda items, which is fine by me. If there are any other thoughts, if the executive director's report has inspired you to think of any other future agenda items, or if there's been one cooking in your community that you want to see us discuss in greater detail and learn a little bit more about. Not seen any, but you're always welcome to email the leadership team, myself and our vice chair, or our executive director, or others within the LRAPA apparatus for a future agenda.
And
Yes, Director
think-
Jones.
Dylan, I think, noted something at the beginning about a suggestion for potential. Is that right? At the
Yeah.
beginning, you made a comment about an agenda item was that for next meeting that you were
Yeah.
suggesting that?
An executive session.
I don't know if we need any further conversation on
Yeah,
that. Just making sure his comment was noted from earlier.
Thank you. I appreciate that. I saw staff we're head nodding and noting appropriate.
Director Keating, I have listed here, there's been a few items that said I would love to hear more, so I noted them
Right.
down. And
Great.
so you, I, and the vice chair will get together and set what that agenda looks like.
Great. At 2 p.m. without objection, we are adjourned.
On the nose.
You're getting rained on whiteboard for the National Weather Service. And the motto down there was, it's very difficult to forecast chaos. Weather is.
But it's interesting, there's a thing called chaos theory, and actually there's rules to chaos that we can learn about and follow, so.
All I know from chaos theory is Jeff Goldblum in Jurassic Park.
He was the radar software engineer, so it's not a quick answer.
There's a DEQ has a meteorologist, who she's like, I'm not an